Hi, I'm Sam Irons. I'm a lead content designer at Atlassian, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about content strategy. Not necessarily the theory of content strategy, but more the practice of it, and give you some approaches and some practical tips and techniques that you can use to help transform your business from viewing content as maybe a reactive service to a strategic business asset. First, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why content strategy is so important, but then I'd like to take you through some learnings that we've had at Atlassian through a recent case study of content-led initiative that has helped our customers grow. We'll explore how we took a strategic approach to making content more relevant for our customers, and I'm going to share some learnings we took along the way to hopefully inspire you to try content strategy out for yourself at your organization and see how it might change the way that your business thinks about content. Sound good? All right, let's get stuck in. The way that companies are building software now has changed over the last few years. We're now living in a time of microservices, and this causes an interesting challenge to content and people who consume content because we're really talking about experiences that can change or alter depending on where those services are being implemented. And in this world, your customers have a really hard time finding information that might be relevant to them. The microservice that they're looking at might behave differently in one context than it does in another. And that's a real challenge for content creators as well, because we need to make a lot of content in order to make sure that there's content that's always relevant and available to customers to help them understand what's going on in products. But they have to wade through a lot of stuff that maybe isn't relevant to the task at hand. At the same time, the way that we create and deliver content is changing. We've gone from, sort of publishing world back in the 70s into static web pages, PDFs, and now into what we call content as a service, where we store and structure content to be served in adaptable and interesting ways, similar to the way that microservices are being created for software products. This new content landscape is a fractured content landscape, and especially for big companies, this fracturing of content and tailoring of it to each of these contexts means that you create a lot of content. How one service acts in one context might be completely different in another context. And what people use a service for in one context might be entirely different in another context. And there's a negative impact to the fracturing of this content landscape in terms of customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, customer engagement. So in order to really address this new future we're living in, we need to change the way that we think about content if we're hoping to scale the content that we offer. Customer service interactions tend to drive disloyalty, help seeking especially, and the ability to find relevant content quickly can save your business. In their book, The Effortless Experience, Dixon, Tomon, and Delisi surveyed 97,000 customers for over 400 companies about their experience with getting product and service support. And they found that any customer service interaction is 4 times more likely to drive disloyalty than it is to drive loyalty. And that's because people are more likely to complain about a bad service experience they've had than they are to praise a company for a good service experience they've had. They actually found that the top 4 out of 5 drivers of disloyalty were about additional perceived effort, if that's trying to contact another person or encountering repeat information or getting transferred between service departments or redirected between websites. All that perceived effort ends up driving disloyalty in business. The Rockleys presented an interesting case study about a big organization making the shift to serving content as a service from breastcancer.org. In their book, Managing Enterprise Content, they wrote about a case study where breastcancer.org writers took a strategic approach to creating more relevant content for breast cancer survivors. That was a relative success story. Their goal was to reach breast cancer patients with information most relevant to their specific diagnoses, even if those people didn't know exactly what to look for. One researcher indicated that the vast majority of patients couldn't accurately report their own diagnoses. And this was even true with highly educated, affluent women who had some of the best doctors in the world. They gave themselves a really simple design prompt to work off of. How can we personalize content to a person's diagnosis when we can't be sure the reported diagnosis was correct? And by addressing this simple problem and taking a strategic approach to addressing this simple problem, they were able to quickly create an app that provides resources for better understanding diagnostic information, getting recent findings related to that diagnosis and tailoring that kind of support experience to a breast cancer survivor's diagnosis. The effect was that they were actually honored with a Webby Award for this. And what's the common thread here? Well, for me, the common thread is content strategy. These content teams that are taking a strategic approach to designing and delivering content experiences are winning. They're winning customers, they're winning awards, they're keeping their businesses afloat. At Atlassian, we're kind of in the middle of this transition from static content to dynamic content. Recently, we took a strategic approach to addressing relevance in our own help content. And we learned some pretty interesting and valuable lessons for our organization about how content designers can create strategic initiatives, about what it takes to get an organization as large as Atlassian to get on board with content-led initiatives, and how to prove to the business the value of the content that we create. And I'm here to tell you today about the lessons that we learned while we took this journey, and to hopefully inspire you to take on the challenge of content strategy, give you a little bit of a glimpse of what content strategy looks like in practice, and use a case study from our own content teams to sort of enforce the learnings along the way. Identifying how content can serve as a strategic asset to your business it requires deeply understanding three key areas. To nail it down, you need to deeply understand your customers, their motivations, their needs. Equally, you need to understand your business, its motivations, its needs, its goals, and the content outcomes that you think you can help drive both of those audiences' goals. Traditionally, content teams are thought of as more of a value-added service that reacts to requests internally or requests from customers, but this reaction can only go so far in terms of creating measurable change through content. To make the most impact, your content and your content teams really need to flip this model in your organization and start thinking about content as a strategic business asset. A deep understanding of these three key areas, customer goals, business goals, and content outcomes, can really help you streamline the ability to measure what matters most to you and to your business, as well as build those processes and practices that will help transform your company and give you the tools that your content team needs to delight both the business and your customers. Finding the overlap between your customers, your business goals, and what you think content can do for both can help you quickly plan and prioritize content initiatives that create really measurable impact. You can ask yourself a few very simple questions. What do your customers want to get done? What are the jobs they're hiring your products for? What are the metrics that your business cares about? What are those signals that they look for to show growth or success, the things that they care most about? And then focus on that overlap to ask questions about how you can create content initiatives. What outcomes do you think content can directly affect? And what metrics do you think that content can directly push? You can use these questions to look for pain points or opportunities that content has to make a real impact on your customers and your business. Write down a hypothesis of how you think you can improve your organization through those goals, and then turn that hypothesis into a challenge for your content teams to take on and build something really interesting and inspiring that can help both the business and your customers. This approach is markedly different than taking requests as a service or reacting to requests from an internal customer. And I hope you can already start to see that this shift really starts to change the way your business thinks about content from being sort of a value-added service to being a strategic business asset. Atlassian is in the middle of this content evolution, and we're also making that transition to structured, adaptable content. It seemed overwhelming at first, but rather than react to some of the demands of our business and our customers, we took a step back. We took some time to think very simply about those three questions and provide answers that we thought would create really compelling content initiatives. We knew a lot about the jobs our customers hire our products for. We knew a lot about the metrics our business cared about. So we discussed about how we thought content could intervene in those goals and help aid both directions. And for us, we saw this overlap that was an opportunity to make content more relevant to the people who are consuming it. And when we sat down to think about what we could do for our customers with more relevant content to help them reduce the effort that they put in to understand, use, and get value of our products, we asked ourselves a simple content design prompt. How might we get the right content to the right person at exactly the right time? There are a few ideas that came out of this. We placed bets on them, And one of those bets was an idea about providing in-product contextual help content that we could leverage people's context in our products to better surface more relevant help content to them. So we wrote down this hypothesis. We believe that in-product help will provide high-quality documentation to users when and where they need it, and we challenged ourselves to take that on as a task. And the first step to taking on that task was to really define the metrics that we needed to understand how we were going to measure the things that mattered most to us, not just to us as content writers, but also to our customers and to the business. Measuring content, it can be really difficult. We as writers, we inherently know the benefits of good content, and we know the pitfalls of bad content, but generally the businesses we work in don't. And regardless of any circumstance, it's not best to assume knowledge. So start from the beginning and align your content creators and your business on how to think about measuring the impact of your content. The first thing you need to do that is to define the metrics that you're going to use to measure that. Governments have been moving through a digital transformation as well, and the ones that have successfully transformed into a digital business have created sort of a standard lens to think about how you can measure content and how it impacts your business. For example, the Victorian state government in Australia looks at these 5 key performance indicators for the content they create. And these key performance indicators are signals that you can build upon and customize to fit your specific implementation, measure the things that really matter to you, to your company, and to your customers. The categories here are a really good starting point for a business that's completely new to measuring content. But I think finding that sweet spot with your specific customers, your specific content implementations and direction and principles and your specific business needs can really help you find more compelling and more persuasive measures for measuring the impact of your content. In our case, we thought about our customer goals and our business goals, and we made a list of the things that we believed content intervention could directly affect. For us, the list looked something like this. We looked at usability. We asked ourselves questions like, does relevant help content increase our customer satisfaction? We looked at engagement. If people read more of this relevant help content, do they become more active users in our products? And conversion, does more relevant help content sell more product? Using this lens, we identified some signals that would indicate that we're moving in the right direction, and we used those signals to help us define the metrics that we wanted to measure to make sure that we were pushing the way we wanted to go. After you have your metrics, the next important thing to do is to get a really solid baseline of your current content solutions. Many companies already have more content than they know what to do with. And content-led initiatives, content-first projects, even really simple auditing and cleanup projects can benefit greatly from knowing exactly how that content is performing right now before making any changes. It's another great reason to get your goals and your measures set out well before you get down the path of making improvements or suggestions. If you're clear on what you want to measure and why you want to measure it, then it's time to go out and actually measure that thing. So for big companies with resourcing, this might look like getting analytics put on a website or building feedback forms into their software experiences. And you might need to engage with data analysts or researchers to get really confident numbers. And all that work requires a very strong content champion within the organization to push those changes through. And while those are sort of the proper data-informed ways to go about these things, they may not be entirely necessary. There's plenty of ways to baseline and measure the performance of your content that are either done on a budget or with very little tooling needed. For example, early signal testing approaches like basic surveys or task-based documentation tests, or even just taking a highlighter test to your coworker's desk for 10 minutes. These are things that you can do in-house with free tools or cheap tools online that take very little time to gain confidence. What's important here is that you identify those metrics that you think are really important to measure, that you think will push your business and customer goals, and then you baseline a measurement of how your current content ecosystem addresses those things. And after you've got a good baseline, you've figured out what you want to measure, and you know how your content's currently handling it, then it's time to play around, to experiment, to look at those initiatives you identified that you've placed bets on and see if they'll make a difference in the goals of your business and your customers. Just a general life tip here, if you can experiment with something that's already been built, it's a lot cheaper and a lot faster than trying to build something from scratch. This is really good, especially if you're not footing the bill yourself or you're on sort of a limited budget. Going scrappy and going cheap when you're first getting your feet wet is the way to figure out a lot of the learnings you need to understand in order to make a full-fledged content strategy. Look around to see if there's someone who's already building and selling a solution that's similar to what you wanted to build. If there is, try it out on a temporary basis as an experiment. Really, the faster you can get a signal back about whether or not your approach is proving the things you want to prove in your hypothesis, then the better you are. Right out the gate, you can course correct, you can create a new plan of attack, or you can place your bet somewhere else that might be more important or more impactful. For us, we did this, we wanted to look into in-product contextual help. There was a product on the market that was already doing this. We took it, we put it into a small experiment with only a few users just to see what they did. We didn't really gain any statistically significant results, but what we did gain was a lot of learning and a lot of encouraging signals to move forward with the experience. For example, we saw that a lot of people, more than we expected of the experiment cohort, were interacting with in-product help. That was really encouraging to us. And we saw that they were actually, it may have been changing their behavior slightly. We saw them doing things described in that in-product help at a higher rate, more frequently and more successfully. The results here were encouraging for us as writers, but they also encouraged our stakeholders to place a little bit more funding behind this and see how much this impact could be at scale at a production level. So this early experiment really helped us create those content champions in our organization that wanted to fund this experience a little bit further, and we got to take that into a new program of work. So there's many reasons why an early experiment might fail or may not show the outcomes that you're expecting it to show. But I guarantee what you will get out of an early experiment is some learnings. There are excellent learning opportunities to help you form, a strongly formed but loosely held opinion about your content strategy, about your content's efficacy on your business and customer goals. So don't be discouraged if your experiments fail or if they raise more questions than they actually answer. In those moments, you're really in the messy work of trying to hone your content strategy and understand the levers of your metrics that your approach can actually push. What's really important when you're learning, though, is to not learn in a silo. An easy way to maintain momentum, to keep getting organizational buy-in, to keep your stakeholders happy and aligned with you, is to bring them along this journey of learning with you. They need to experience what you're experiencing in order for them to understand why you back this as a content strategy and why it provides a strategic asset to the business. So experimental results can show you a direction. They can give you kind of a no-go direction. They can highlight some areas of pause or concern before moving forward. But ultimately, you won't know anything until you're actually out in the wild and the majority of your customers are seeing the experience you're building. In the case of our in-product help experiment, we learned enough to interest our stakeholders to pursue a production version of the experiment. But there was still more learning to do and a lot of open questions, especially about details in our content strategy, practices, procedures, and how we were going to keep this content healthy through a long period of time. And trying to answer those open questions helped us to understand that we're not just building content, we're not just building a content delivery experience, we're also building a process, and we're building practices that are supposed to go out into the future for our teams, outlive our content experience and outlive maybe our work, that can lay the foundation for how the business will think about content far into the future. To effectively scale your content and your content teams, to make sure that they're resistant to maybe a change in scope, an increase in scope in the best circumstance, or shifting company priorities, or shifting personnel, or a sudden loss of funding in the worst case. You really need to codify and explain the processes, procedures, and best practice that will keep your experience healthy. 3 things that we like to use that are very good at keeping your content solution on track are principles, standards and guidelines, and some vision work. According to Ben Brignall, who's the owner of Principles.design website, which is an open source collection of principles on the web, he likes to say that principles will guide your teams towards making appropriate decisions. Design principles help with those decision-making process. They really help negotiate trade-offs. And they really can serve as a way to evaluate whatever you build at the end, whatever you end up conceiving and building. For content-led projects, you can create a set of principles that are specific to the thing you want to build, but make sure that those complement your company's overall design principles, your overall voice and tone principles, or your brand guidance, rather than compete with them. I personally recommend, if you're working with designers or you're building a new website or something, having two sets of principles, one for the interaction and approach to how you might design interactions, and one for the content itself. In our case, we came up with two sets of principles, one for the interaction, which talked about things like how help is a passive interaction. We don't actively message help to customers until they reach out to us. About how context is the most important thing. We're going to take as much context as we possibly can in order to target and surface the best, most relevant help to people. About how we would prefer to recommend and then allow for search before we ever try browse experiences in our product. And the content itself had separate principles about the content always being accurate, making sure that content was written to help people achieve their goals in a way that we can measure those goals as well through product analytics. About how that content needs to scale. It needs to be able to be reused in a lot of places. It needs to be able to outgrow the writing team, and how that content should be standard and purposeful. Standard purposeful content, I think, is something that we need across the entire business, across the entire industry. Standards maintain consistency and quality when writers follow them. We know that, but they have a really tactical purpose as well. Content standards can help readers know what to expect when they approach a certain piece of content. They know where to go to look for specific pieces of content. If you have standard purposeful content, people will know how to work with that content, how to interact with it, how to scan it, how to consume it, how to go about working with that content so they can achieve their goals with it. If you have standard content, people don't miss really important information because they know where priority information in that content lives. If they meet a piece of content that's non-standard, they won't find that important information. And it really helps speed up efficiency. People know what to read, what they're going to get value out of, so they only have to read as much as they need to. They don't have to read anything more. But I think Nielsen Norman Group put it the best, where they said standards increase users' sense of mastery, increase their ability to get things done, and increase their overall satisfaction with an experience. For example, in our in-product help experience, we wanted to really nail down the types of content that we would allow into the product as support content. And to do that, we ran a number of workshops. We talked a lot about, should we bring in tutorials? Should we bring in other types of video content, other types of that? But we've decided to start small and start with these three types: conceptual topics, procedural topics, and reference topics. And in order to make sure that those were standard and scalable, we spent a great deal of time talking about, when was the right time to use each type of content, what information will be required in that content, what is supplemental, and what order that content should follow. And developing these standards kind of gave us an unexpected benefit in that we got a lot more organizational support than we thought we would from the get-go. These experiences exploit a content that is being served out of an API from our new content management system. So developing those standards, we were actually developing the standards for all support content that was going to make its way into that new content management system. For me, it was an interesting learning on the multiplying effect of content strategy, especially content strategy-led initiatives on an organization. A well-formed strategic approach influences the teams around you. It saves them time developing these kind of fundamental principles, these fundamental standards, and it gets a lot more buy-in from the content teams that might be working adjuncts to you. So these standards have been built on internally now. They've been expanded for different use cases, and they still remain as the model for good writing at Atlassian for the entire business. That's something that's come out of our strategic approach and has multiplied the influence of our writers across Atlassian. But in order to get to this point, you really need to know where you want to go, right? You can't really know how to get someplace unless you know where you're going. So a clearly laid out vision can help you do this. A vision really lights the path forward for where you want to take your experience in the future. It can help you keep your content solution on a directed path. It helps you get stakeholder buy-in by showing the really awesome things you could do with your experience and with your content if you were given a little funding. It can help you negotiate foundational decisions. If you have a fork in the road at the beginning of how you should build something, knowing where you want to get to in 5 years can really help you determine which path to take. And it can really help your business align on the why behind why you think this approach is a good strategic advantage for your company. Daniel Rustin, who's a designer at Google, he puts it this way, that being aligned on a design vision helps give focus and direction, and it makes sure you're aiming for something with a purpose. And what form that vision ultimately takes for your team can vary. It can be a clickable prototype, a video, some animated GIFs. The point is to show the intent and the possible future of your solution and why that's so compelling to your business and to your customers. We did this with our in-product help experience. We took a small group of core team members. It was me, a UX designer, a product manager, developer. We took an afternoon out to ideate on some future states for in-product help. And from our broad exploration, we were able to find some common themes that we thought were really compelling. And we used our principles to help us decide which direction would be good in those themes to present to our stakeholders about how they can help achieve our customer goals and our business goals. The deliverable for us took the form of a sort of a playback with interested stakeholders and an internal blog post with some animated GIFs that told a nice story about what help interactions could look like in the future of our products, and how those help interactions help our customers achieve their goals and ladder up to our business goals. That vision helped us create a roadmap. It helped us prioritize some of the features we wanted to make, and it helped us make some decisions early on about how we wanted to structure our data, how we wanted to add metadata to certain content, what approaches we wanted to take in order to be able to deliver on this vision in the future if we were given the chance to. And that's something that's interesting to note about visions as well, is they're not meant to live forever. They're pretty organic. You're going to learn a lot of things when you get out into the wild and start putting your content in front of customers. So content strategy really is cyclical. I think after a few years, you need to go back and revisit that strategy, ask those same basic questions you asked at the beginning. Who are our customers? What do they want to get done? Why are they hiring our products? What's our business about? What metrics do they care about? What signals do they look for? And how do we think content can intervene? Now, you may not find a lot of differences from when you did it the first time, but I guarantee with the inputs and learnings you have from implementing these solutions, you'll have something that will change your mind or show you a stronger direction that your content can help push the metrics and goals of your business and your customers. And I'd be remiss if I didn't show you the customer experience we've built from all of this, right? So here we are 3.5 years later. We've tested our muscle on transforming our organization from a content reactionary kind of content service to a proactive strategic business asset for Atlassian. We wanted to develop more relevant content, and I'm happy to show off the results of that experimentation through small production into more iterative design and then to where we are now. Here you can see a user interacting with our interface. They might have a question, and when they reach out for help, they get content that is related directly to what they're seeing. They're looking at a board, they can read about what the board is. If they decide to change their context, move on with their day, maybe look at the backlog and get stuck again when they reach out for help, we use that context to know what to surface for them, show them articles about the backlog, or help them search for articles about the concepts that they're interested in. And this experience is deceptively elegant, in my opinion. It hides a lot of that work, a lot of that thinking, that experimentation, the effort that went into building it. The team that built it was pretty small. It was myself, a UX designer, a product manager, and a developer. We're all working only part-time on this project. But as we explored the idea, we took a strategic approach that helped us inform and transform the way that our business thinks about content in general. We made a lot of what I like to call content champions across the business that prove to leadership that content can be a great business asset that helps our customers be more engaged with our products, be more active with our products, and be more overall satisfied with our products. So I wanted to give you some pro tips that we learned over these few years, really putting content strategy into practice that you can take away into your business, into your content teams, and share with them. The first one is that I think you should start small, and this is kind of counterintuitive. While it seems easier to start with a broad strategy, sort of raise the ground and start from the beginning, it's not really practical for a lot of businesses. In reality, content strategy and content design is pretty new to most businesses. it's going to take a little bit for them to take that transformation on. And while there might be a common approach to document where the business feels pain because of a lack of a content strategy, that really has limited efficacy. Writers know inherently, right, that it's better to show than to tell. So I think it's good to take a step back and find those little opportunities where you can show measurable impact. Start small, show those results, iterate, expand, create champions along the way. I think that has a much better approach to long-term success than trying to just start a big project from scratch. And along the lines of measuring how that might impact the business, I think it's really important that you measure outcomes, not just outputs. One of the biggest problems I see across the content design industry as a whole is that people want to measure the amount of work that they're doing, the amount of work that content strategists and content creators are doing, rather than the impact of that work. If you're tempted to measure success by the amount of pages you've moved, or the amount of words you've deleted, or the amount of content you've consolidated, the number of workshops you've held, those kind of things, just take a step back, breathe, ask yourself why those outputs were important, what outcomes they were helping to drive for your business and for your customers. I think you'll get a lot further with stakeholders if you can show that impact of the outcomes you're creating rather than just the amount of work you're doing. At Atlassian, we like to say that we don't celebrate shipping, we don't celebrate delivering the experience. What we celebrate is once we've measured and know for a fact that what we've shipped has made our customers' life better and we've made them or helped them succeed in their goals. And my third big tip for you folks is to really get your stakeholders engaged along the ride with you. You know, building products is a collaborative experience. Collaboration is key, especially for something as organic as content. So developing your strategy and aligning it to business objectives, you know, defining those success metrics. These are all things you can do as a team. So involve your product managers, your developers, your engineers, your CFO, your CEO, anyone who's really willing to listen. Get them in the table and help them inform and contribute to your content strategy. Getting those stakeholders in early, getting them involved in workshops, or even just getting them to review and sort of be involved in your deliverables can really go a long way in creating those content champions at your organization, and help those allyships can really help you make sure that your content is taken seriously as a business asset instead of as maybe a value-added service. It's a really tall order to ask someone to change an organization individually. Many hands make light work. So I really encourage you to get your teams involved in your content strategy initiatives, get them excited about content the same way you're excited about it. So that's it. I hope this case study has helped you better understand what content strategy looks like in practice and how that might play out in an organization as large as Atlassian. I hope I've given you some insights into practical approaches, some tools, and the tips that might help you transform your organization. But really, I've hoped I've inspired you to just go out, think about your goals and needs of your customers, the goals and needs of your business, and get excited about using your very unique skill set as an asset that can really create positive impact on people's lives. Thank you.
All right, Sam, thank you so much for joining us today for the Q&A after your excellent session. It was wonderful to listen to your thoughts about content strategy there. We've had some great questions coming through from folks in the comments. Thanks very much, everyone, for your thoughtful questions coming through for the chats. They've been great. Let's start with a question that relates to in-product help related questions. So there was, you mentioned that there was a number of people interacting with the in-product help and that those numbers were higher than you expected. What can you give us a bit more insight into sort of the expected engagement for those numbers, and maybe how you came up with that understanding of the increase in adoption?
Yeah, I guess first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the organizers for having me. It's been awesome. It's my first Write the Docs, so I get to walk away feeling like a very proud documentarian. So I appreciate that. Yeah, about numbers with that experience were pretty interesting to me because we hadn't really tracked any of this kind of stuff. I think tracking what docs do to actual product engagement is something that doesn't happen too often in companies. So we took a first stab at it, and we figured, you know, most people probably go to Google to look up support material. Do we think people actually press this button was our first big question, like, is product help worth it? We don't know if we don't know how many people are clicking the button to see if they'll go there. Some of our previous work in email campaigns and other things like that, we thought maybe we'd see about 5% or less kind of engagement with this kind of thing. But seeing 15 to 20% people clicking a question mark button in a product was a big revelation for us. And it's only been, over the years, been the numbers got more confident. So that actually seems to be a pretty average number across multiple products, that about 15 and 20% of people will actually reach out for help inside the product. So I think that was a really interesting insight to gain for our team, to be able to have those discussions with stakeholders about, hey, 50 to 70,000 people a month are clicking this button. We want them to have a great experience,
When you use the actual, percentages are one thing, right? But when you actually put an actual user count against that is a huge amount of engagement on a single element in the UI. So that's very, very interesting. Another question here was, it's surrounding stakeholder engagement, which seems to be a bit of a recurring theme in some of the presentations we've had so far in the conference. Have you got any sort of tips for engaging stakeholders during the whole process of content strategy?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is really just get them involved. People like to feel heard. People like to have their opinions known. I think it's really important about just understanding alignment and expectations from people as well. Like knowing what your stakeholders actually expect from you, and and then teaching them what you can actually do for them. If you don't have those conversations, it's going to be difficult to get any sort of engagement from them. And usually, I've found over my career that a lot of people don't know what we do. They don't know the impact that we can have. So I think that it can be tough, especially moving to a new org or moving to a different part of the business. I've done this very recently myself, where I've come and I've been doing this forever, and I would expect that all the people around me know exactly what I do. But no, it is that starting from square one every time and reminding people this is the value we bring, this is the service that we provide. And then bringing them into your process can really help get them engaged, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a really good insight there, Sam. So in the whole notion, I guess, of that, or the theme of engaging stakeholders, sometimes we need to look outside corporate when we're engaging for content strategy. So I think probably you'd agree that sometimes content strategy is easier to sell inside software companies. But what do you do when you need to look at maybe companies that are smaller, or perhaps maybe not traditionally up to speed with content strategy as such? How do you think you can actually engage those folks better?
Yeah, I think the tricky part there is that we have this idea of what content strategy is, as if it's a thing where it's sort of this methodology and this standard approach or something, and it is. But I think just strategy in general is what we're looking at here. And I do think that any business will appreciate strategy. Maybe not calling it content strategy can be beneficial in non-IT places. I think when we say content strategy in software industry, people know that term, so it's easier for us to advocate for that. But really just it's about making sure that you're in between the business goals and the customer goals, and you're helping push both of those things. So if you can clearly articulate that you understand what the business wants, and you can clearly articulate that you have a unique set of skill sets that can push those goals strategically, then I think those conversations are a lot easier to have.
Definitely. So on the subject of standards and things like that, I think folks notice the fair sort of focus on standards and the importance that they play in content strategy. Have you considered sort of taking a best practice approach to these standards outside the organization, and maybe even thinking about sort of an open source approach to them as well? Maybe socializing them more so they're, I guess, a little bit more discoverable?
I would love to. I think you're touching on a part of my career that I think I want to focus on more, and I think the industry could focus on more. We as writers don't really contribute back to a body of knowledge the way that other industries do. So, heuristics, UX, UI design, they have a very established peer-reviewed body of knowledge. I think everyone here, you have all of the case studies in front of you of the great work that you've been doing, how can we get together to contribute to an international body of knowledge that can help push best practices, help people understand and learn from what you're doing in step with while you're doing it? I think that's something that all content designers, all technical writers could really gain value from. So I would encourage us to have more conversations about how do we create these standard bodies? How do we make sure that we're sharing information and making it freely available to people across the world so that they can gain all the same insights that we get from our internal development, our internal production?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it is the curse of the internet and the fact that, it's so open and you can find so much information, but you just need to know where that starts somewhere. And that can be a really hard thing for people who sometimes just don't know what to search for. So yeah, I like that approach as well. I think that's really good. Now, let's talk about scalable content when we're looking at thinking about content strategy. What do you think are some best practices from your perspective about making scalable content?
Right. Well, scalable content, I mean, it starts immediately from just structured content, like well-structured content that can be, in our case, being called through a custom API, or in other cases being crawled correctly, or marked in a way that search engines can read it. That is one way to scale your content. The main point of that is about reuse. So the more you can reuse a piece of content, the less that you have to maintain. And that's kind of the transition from those static web pages where one change would mean you might have to change that UI reference or that term definition in 50,000 places. When you have that as a piece of reusable content or a component that can be used in multiple places, you only change it once. So that's one way to scale. Another way to scale is with those best practices, those standards, those principles inside of your writing team and inside of your organization. As the company grows, there will be less of you to influence the company. So having those things in place and letting people self-help and self-govern their own content creation can really help scale consistency and best practice that way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, that was, as usual, a rapid fire 10-minute round. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Thank you, Sam, for your answers.